They called me the cursed Duke of Harrowden, and for 6 years I did nothing to correct them. It was easier to be cursed than to be pitied. A cursed man is left alone. The county drew its shutters when my carriage passed. Mothers turned their daughters' faces from my gate, and the road that ran up to Harrowden Hall grew a green rind of moss down its center where no wheel had worn it. I let it. I had buried my wife and the child she carried in the same frozen week of a hard December, and when the ground closed over them, it closed over me as well. I gave the order that the music room be shut, that the great mirrors in the gallery be turned to the wall, that the gardens my Cordelia had loved be let go to whatever the Moor wished to make of them. And the Moor, which forgives nothing, made of them a wilderness. So when the fever came to Harrowden that autumn, it found a house already half a tomb. It began with the boot boy, and then the 2 housemaids we still kept, and then old Bartleby, my steward, who had served my father before me and had refused, through all 6 years, to leave a master everyone else had abandoned. Bartleby was 70 if he was a day, and when the fever took him, it took him hard. I sat by his bed the first night and watched him burn, and I sent Coombe, the last groom, riding through the dark to the physician at Thornby. The physician did not come. He sent word instead, a boy on a pony, keeping well back from the door, that his own household was afflicted and he could not stir. It was a lie, and both of us knew it. No man of standing would set foot in the cursed house on the moor, fever or no. I stood in my own hall with that message in my hand and understood with a strange flat calm that we would simply die here, the few of us, and no one in 3 counties would think it anything but overdue. It was Coombe who spoke the name. He stood turning his hat in his raw hands and said there was a woman down in Harrowden village, not a doctor, not a proper anything but a healer, he said, who nursed the poor and set bones and brought down fevers, and who, he had heard, was not afraid of much. Her father had been an apothecary, dead these several years, and she had kept herself since by tending the sick that no one else would tend. "Send for her," I said. Coombe hesitated. "She'll not come for money, most like, your grace, not up here, folks say." "I know what folks say. Send for her, and tell her I will pay her whatever she asks." He rode down in the wet dark, and I went back up to sit with Bartleby, and I did not truly believe she would come. Why would she? I would not have come to Harrowden to me. But somewhere past midnight I heard the knocker fall against the great door, 3 plain, unhurried strokes, as if the person on the step had all the time in the world and no fear of what stood behind the wood, and I went down myself, because there was no one else to go, and I opened my own door to the storm. She was soaked through. That was my first sight of Miss Adeline Croft, a woman of perhaps 25 standing in the doorway with the rain sheeting off the hood of a plain gray cloak, a heavy basket on her arm, mud to the hem of her skirts, and on her face not one flicker of the thing I had grown so used to seeing that I had stopped noticing its absence would be strange. There was no fear in her. There was no awe, and no revulsion, and no greedy curiosity to see the mad Duke in his ruin. She looked up at me the way one looks at a man, an ordinary, tired man who has opened a door, and she said, in a low, level voice that carried under the wind, "You have fever in the house. Where is the worst of it?" "My steward," I said, "an old man upstairs." "Then let us not stand here wasting the night on the step," she said, and stepped past me into my hall as though she had crossed that threshold 100 times, and I shut the storm out behind her. I do not know what I expected of a village healer. Something furtive, perhaps, something that traded on herbs and mutterings. What I got, once she had shed the dripping cloak and I had led her up to Bartleby's room, was a brisk, exacting competence that shamed the physician who had stayed home to his fire. She laid the back of her hand to the old man's brow and to his throat. She peeled back his eyelid. She bent and set her ear to his laboring chest and listened a long moment with her eyes shut. Then she was all motion. Windows cracked despite the storm to move the thick air. The great heaped blankets stripped back to a single sheet, because, she said, we would not roast the fever into him, we would draw it out. Water cool, not cold, and vinegar and clean cloths, and would someone build the fire in the next room, not this one, and set a kettle. She said all of it without once raising her voice and without once looking to me for permission, and I found myself, a duke in my own house, fetching a basin because a nurse had told me to, and glad of the fetching, because it was the first useful thing my hands had done in 6 years. She worked over Bartleby until the gray came into the windows. Somewhere in those hours the old man's breathing loosened, the dreadful whistling ease went out of it, and toward dawn he slept a true sleep, not the burning stupor he had been in. She straightened at last, pressing her hands into the small of her back, and only then did she seem to take in the room around her, the room around us. The cold hall glimpsed through the open door, the turned mirrors, the dust sheets, the 6 years. She did not remark on any of it. That, I would learn, was her particular grace, that she saw everything and remarked only on what wanted doing. "He is not out of it," she said. "The next day will tell, but he is stronger than he looks, your steward, and he has a reason to live which is more than half the battle." She glanced at me. "The maids, you said, and a boy, take me to them. You have been at this all night." "And the fever has been at them all night," she said, "and it does not tire. Where are they?" I took her to them. And so it went through that day and the next. Miss Croft moving from sickbed to sickbed in my dying house, sleeping in snatches on a chair, eating what she was made to eat and no more, drawing 3 of my 4 sick servants back from the edge they had been standing on by no art more mysterious than attention, cleanliness, cool water, and a refusal to give any of them up. The boot boy she lost on the 3rd night. I know she counted that loss hard, though she showed it to no one. I came upon her in the passage in the small hours after, standing very still with her hand flat against the wall, and she did not weep, but she stood as a person stands who is holding herself upright by an act of will. When she heard me she straightened and said only, "He was too far gone before I came, an hour earlier and perhaps." And then, because she was who she was, "The others will do. Go and sleep, your grace. You are no use to me falling down." I did not sleep. I sat up instead in the cold library with a single candle and thought about the phrase she had used of Bartleby, that he had a reason to live, and I thought that no one had troubled to wonder, these 6 years, whether I did. On the 5th day the fever broke in the house and did not take me, though I half hoped it might. Miss Croft, having no more dying to prevent, at last consented to sleep a full night, and when she woke she came to find me to say she would be going. I did not want her to go. I understood the wanting with a kind of alarm, as one notices the first crack in ice underfoot. It was not, I told myself firmly, the woman. It was that she had brought motion and voice and the smell of clean linen and vinegar into rooms that had held nothing but dust and my own thoughts for 6 years, and I did not want the silence back. That was all. So I said, more curtly than I meant, "Bartleby is not strong enough to be left." She regarded me steadily. She had a plain face, I will be honest, for she would want me to be. Hers was not a beauty that stopped a room, but a face that grew on you the way a plain landscape grows on you, all its worth in the weather that crossed it, and her eyes were a clear gray that missed nothing. "He is not," she agreed. "He will want watching a fortnight yet, and the maids longer. I had thought to leave instructions." "Instructions are not watching," I said. "Stay. Stay until they are well, properly well. I will pay you for the whole of it and for your trouble besides." Something moved behind the gray eyes, not offense, but a kind of dry amusement. "You have said that word to me 4 times now, your grace. Pay. As though you are afraid I will not understand any other reason to remain in this house." She let that sit a moment. "I will stay because your steward is old and I have grown fond of the stubborn creature. And because the little maid, Suki, has a weakness in the chest I do not like the sound of and mean to see mended. You may pay me the going rate for a nurse, and not a penny of your besides, which I think you offer because you believe a person must be bribed to stay near you." No one had spoken to me so in 6 years. No one had spoken to me so, perhaps, in my whole life. A duke is not, as a rule, contradicted at his own hearth by a woman with mud on her hem. I ought to have been affronted. Instead, I felt something in my chest that I did not at first recognize. It had been so long, a loosening, small and sharp, that I would later be forced to call the beginning of the thaw. Very well, I said, the going rate and no besides. No besides, she agreed, and that was the bargain that broke my curse, though neither of us knew it, struck in a cold hall over a sick old man, for the going rate and not a penny more. She stayed. And staying she began, without ever once seeming to intend it, to bring Harrowden back to life. It started with small things, and she never asked my leave for any of them, which I came to see was deliberate. Had she asked, I should have refused, out of the long habit of refusing, and she knew it. She simply did them and dared me to command them undone, and I never did. The dust sheets came off the furniture in the rooms the convalescents used, because, she said, sick people did not mend well among shrouds. A fire was lit in the morning room, which had held no fire in years, because Suki's chest wanted warmth and dry air. Coombe, on her instruction, cut back the worst of the bramble that had grown across the kitchen garden path, so that the cook, we had a cook again, Mrs. Pett having crept back to her post now the fever was gone, might get to what herbs still grew wild among the ruin of the beds. Little by little the house filled with the ordinary sounds it had been starved of, footsteps and the clatter of a bucket, and once from the kitchen a burst of Mrs. Pett's laughter, quickly stifled, as though laughter in that house were still a thing that might get one dismissed. I found that I went about the house now to be where the noise was. I told myself I went to look in on Bartleby. I did look in on Bartleby. But I went the long way, through the rooms where she was likely to be, and I stood in doorways longer than a man needs to stand in a doorway, and I listened to her talk to the maids, plain, warm, unsentimental talk, the talk of a woman who has spent her life among the sick and the poor and has no illusions and no cruelty either. And I felt, standing there unseen, like a man come in from a long cold to stand at the edge of a lit window, not wanting to knock, only wanting the warmth of the glass. She caught me at it once. I was in the passage outside the morning room, and she came out with a basin and nearly walked into me, and she stopped and looked at me, and I had no reason on my tongue for why I was there. And instead of pretending, as I might have, that I was passing, I said the truth, which surprised me more than it can have surprised her. The house is louder, I said. Since you came, I find I do not mind it. She studied me a moment. Then she said, quite gently, grief likes a quiet house, your grace. It can spread out in the quiet and take up all the room. It doesn't care for noise. Noise crowds it. She shifted the basin on her hip. You've given it a very great deal of room these 6 years. I don't wonder it's grown to fill the place. I do not know what I would have said to that. I was spared the need to answer because just then Suki called for her from within and she went. But the words stayed with me, and that night, alone in the library, I found I could not read for them. Grief likes a quiet house. I had kept the quiet like a vow. I had told myself the silence was reverence, that to let music back into the music room, light back into the gallery, laughter back into the kitchen, would be a kind of betrayal, a saying that I had ceased to mourn. But that was not what the silence had been. The silence had only been grief, given all the room in the world to grow, until it had grown into the whole of my life and left no room for a life beside it. I did not sleep well that night, but it was not the old sleeplessness, the flat dead lying awake of 6 years. It was the restlessness of a man who has been shown a door in a wall he had thought unbroken. The gallery was the hardest. She came upon it perhaps a week into her stay, the long gallery where the mirrors hung turned to the wall and the great portraits, Cordelia's among them, hung shrouded in Holland cloth. She did not turn a single one of them. She only stood in the doorway a long while taking it in, and then she came and found me and asked, without preamble, the lady in the far portrait under the cloth, your wife? The question went into me like cold water. No one spoke of Cordelia to me. It was the one mercy the county's fear had done me, that no one dared. I found I was gripping the arm of my chair. Yes, I said. And the child she was carrying, Miss Croft said, not a question, was to have been your first. How do you? Bartleby, she said simply. He is an old man mending from a fever, and old men mending from fevers talk, and I let him because it does them good. He is very fond of you. He blames himself a little that he could not, that no one could reach you all these years. He would like you to be less alone before he dies." She said it plainly, without weighting it, and it landed all the harder for that. "I am telling you because you should know he thinks it, and because you are not a man, I think, who wishes to be handled. I would rather say the true thing to your face." I could not speak for a moment. When I did, my voice came rough. "You are a very strange sort of nurse, Miss Croft." "I'm a very ordinary sort," she said. "The strangeness is only that you have been so long without plain speech that it sounds like a foreign tongue to you." She glanced back toward the shrouded gallery. "I will not touch a thing in that room. It is yours to keep as you wish, but I will say one thing and then hold my peace. A covered mirror does not unhappen the thing you are grieving. It only means you can no longer see anything else. Not the room, not the light, not yourself." She turned back to me. "Your Suki asks after you, by the by. She has decided you are not cursed at all, only sad, and she is very stern that everyone should know it. I thought you would like to hear that a child has ruled on the matter." And she left me there, and I stood in the doorway of the gallery a long time. And then, I could not have told you why, or rather I could, and the why frightened me. I went in, and I lifted the holland cloth from the mirror nearest the door, and I turned it back to face the room, and I let it hold the gray light of the moor for the first time in 6 years. I did not go so far as Cordelia's portrait. That would come later, and it would be the hardest thing I ever did, and I would do it with Adeline Croft's hand in mine. But I turned the one mirror, and when I looked into it, half dreading what 6 years had made of me, I saw only a man thinner than I remembered, grayer at the temple than my years warranted, but a man, not a monster, a man who could, perhaps, be looked at without fear. A child had ruled on the matter. I found I wished to earn the ruling. It was about this time that I began, in the private country of my own thoughts, to call her Adeline, and to feel a foolish gladness when I heard her step in the passage, and to invent small reasons to be in the room she was in. I knew what it was. I was not a boy. I was a man of 34 who had loved once, wholly, and lost, and I knew the shape of the thing coming over me, and I knew, too, all the reasons it was impossible. She was a healer of no family. Her father had been a country apothecary, a tradesman. Her mother, she told me once, a farmer's daughter. She had no fortune, no connection, no name that any drawing-room in England would recognize as anything but a name to be pitied or sneered at. And I was the Duke of Harrowden. Cursed, ruined, half forgotten, but a duke, with a duke's blood and a duke's obligations, and hovering always at the edge of my affairs, a duke's heir. To love where I was coming to love was, by every rule the world I had been born into held sacred, an absurdity worse, a scandal. The world would forgive a duke a great many things. It would forgive him coldness and cruelty and 6 years of madness on a moor. It would not forgive him this. I knew all that. I told it to myself sternly and often, and it made not the smallest difference, because a heart that has been frozen 6 years and feels the first warmth does not consult the rules. It only turns toward the warmth, the way the mirror I had turned now held the light. The turning point, the moment I stopped telling myself it was only the noise of the house I loved, and admitted it was the woman, came on a gray afternoon in the wreck of Cordelia's garden. Adeline had taken to going out there of an afternoon, when the sick no longer needed her every hour. She had a healer's interest in what grew, and even a garden gone 6 years to ruin holds treasures for one who knows where to look. Self-seeded feverfew and comfrey run rampant, and the tough survivors of the old physic beds. I came out one afternoon and found her on her knees in the wet earth, her sleeves pushed back, her hands black with soil, working free a great tangle of bindweed from a rosebush that had gone half wild but had not, against all likelihood, died. She was talking to the rosebush, low and companionable, the way she talked to the sick, and she did not hear me come. I stood and watched her a moment, the plain gray dress, the smudge of earth on her cheek, the absolute unself-conscious absorption of a person doing work she loves, and something in me simply gave way, quietly and completely, the way a bank of snow gives way in a thaw, all at once and without a sound. She looked up then and saw me and sat back on her heels and pushed a loose strand of hair off her forehead with the back of one dirty wrist, leaving a fresh streak of soil. "Your rose is alive," she said, pleased, as if reporting good news about a patient. "It has been strangling under this bindweed for years, and it has hung on out of sheer stubbornness. Cut it back hard this autumn and feed the root, and it will astonish you in the spring." She looked at the freed cane, at the one bud on it, tight and green. "Some things want only to be given a little room, and a reason to go on." "You have been saying that to me since the night you came," I said, "in one way and another." She met my eyes and did not pretend to misunderstand. "I have," she said quietly. "Have you been listening?" "Yes," I said. And then, because I had spent 6 years in silence and had no craft left for anything but the truth, Adeline. I had never called her so aloud. I watched the name go into her, watched her go very still, kneeling there in the ruined bed, her dirty hands loose in her lap. For a long moment neither of us spoke, and the more wind went over us, and the one green bud on the freed rose cane trembled and held. "Your Grace," she said at last, and her voice was not quite steady, "you must not." "Gabriel," I said. "My name is Gabriel. You have brought half my house back from the grave and turned my mirrors to the light and told me the plain truth for a month together, and I will not be your Grace to you in this garden. My name is Gabriel." "I know your name," she said low. "I know a great many things I have no business knowing of a man I have no business." She stopped. She looked down at her hands. When she looked up again, the gray eyes were bright and steady and full of something that was not quite refusal and not at all indifference. "I am a nurse, Gabriel. I am an apothecary's daughter who mends what fever has spoiled. In a week or a fortnight your Bartleby will be well and your Suki's chest will be sound, and there will be no more reason under heaven for me to be in your house, and I will go back down to the village and tend the poor, which is my life and my proper place, and you will," her voice caught and steadied, "you will turn your mirrors back to the light and let a little noise into your house and mend, which is what I came to do. That is the whole of what this is. It cannot be anything else. You know it cannot. You are the Duke of Harrowden." "I am a man who was dead 6 years," I said, "and you woke me. I will not go back to sleep because the world has rules about who may wake whom." "The world's rules," she said, and now there was a kind of gentle desperation in it, "will fall on you far harder than on me, and I will not be the cause of it. You have been 6 years the county's ghost. Let a nameless nurse into your heart and you will be its scandal, and they will not," she shook her head. "They will not forgive it. Not you, a duke, and me, a tradesman's girl. Men have been forgiven murder in this county more easily than they would forgive you that. I have nursed the poor long enough to know exactly how the world treats a woman who forgets her place, and exactly how it treats the great man who lets her. I will not do that to you. I would rather go." "Then you feel it too," I said. She was silent, and her silence was the truest answer she could have given me, and we both knew it, and the one green bud on the rose held between us like a small stubborn flame. "Do not ask me that," she whispered. "It is not a fair question to a woman who must leave." "I am asking you not to leave," I said. But she rose and dusted the earth from her skirts and said, in something nearer her ordinary steady voice, though it cost her, "Suki will be wanting me." And she went in and left me alone in the ruined garden with the freed rose, and I understood that I had frightened her not for herself but for me, that she saw more clearly than I did the size of the thing I was proposing to do, and that her instinct, honed by a lifetime of watching the world grind down those who stepped above their station, was to spare me from it, even at the cost of herself, which only made me love her the more. I would have gone on in that manner, I think, courting her by inches, wearing down her scruples with patience, had the world not just then arrived at my gate. His name was Everton Marchmont, and he was my cousin and my heir, my father's younger brother's son, a smooth, elegant, chronically embarrassed man some years my senior in worldliness though younger in blood, who had spent the 6 years of my ruin in London running through more money than he had and waiting, with a patience he did not trouble much to hide, for the cursed Duke of Harrowden to do the decent thing and die without issue, whereupon the title, the estate, and the not inconsiderable fortune that came with them would fall into his open and expectant hands. He wrote to me twice a year dutiful, hollow letters, and he had not set foot at Harrowden in 5. That he set foot there now, arriving in a hired chaise on a raw afternoon with his valet and a great deal of luggage, told me that word had traveled. And word had traveled because that is the one thing that travels faster than fever, even to a house on a moor. The news that the cursed Duke had a young woman living under his roof. Everton was all warmth at the door, and I knew him too well to trust a particle of it. "Gabriel," he cried, clasping my hand in both of his, "cousin, you cannot conceive my relief. We had such reports fever in the house, half the servants dead, and you shut up here with no one to look to you. I came the instant I could arrange it. You look—" he checked himself, taking me in, and I watched him fail to find me as ruined as he had hoped. "You look remarkably well, in fact. Remarkably." His eyes went past me into the hall, where, I would have wagered my fortune on it, he was looking for her. He found her at dinner. I could not decently keep them apart. Adeline took her meals with me now, a familiarity that had grown up so naturally I had stopped noticing its impropriety, and I would not banish her below stairs to satisfy my cousin's notions. So the 3 of us sat at the long table in the dining room where the dust sheets had, at Adeline's quiet instigation, lately come off, and Everton was charming, and cruel in the particular way of a man who does his cruelty in perfect courtesy, so that to object is to seem the bore. "And you are the nurse, I understand," he said to her over the soup with a smile. "How fortunate for my cousin, and your people are from the village, is that right? Your father was in trade, I think I heard, an apothecary." He said the word as one lays down a card one knows to be trumps. "Remarkable, and here you are quite one of the household, quite at home." He turned the smile on me. "It does you great credit, Gabriel, your democratic spirit, in these times. Though I confess, I am old-fashioned enough to wonder what people will say." "People say I am cursed," I said. "I have long since stopped consulting their opinions." "Ah, but this is different, cousin." Everton's smile did not waver. "A curse a man cannot help. This, a small gesture that took in Adeline the table, the 2 of us, this a man chooses, and the world is very hard on what a man of your rank chooses beneath him, not on him in the main, on her." He turned back to Adeline, all sympathy. "You will forgive me, Miss Croft, for speaking plainly, but I speak as a friend to you both. A woman in your position, I am sure entirely blameless, becomes, when talk begins, the object of the talk, not the great man, her. It is monstrously unjust. But it is the way of the world, and I should be doing you no kindness to pretend otherwise." I saw the shot go home. I saw Adeline's face, which she kept perfectly composed, and I saw beneath the composure the thing he had aimed for, not fear for herself, but the confirmation of the very thing she had told me in the garden, spoken now by a Marchmont at my own table, that to be loved by me was to be destroyed by the world, and that she would be the one the destruction fell on. "You are very good to concern yourself, sir," she said, in a voice like level ground. "But I am only in the house until the last of the sick are mended, and then I shall be gone back to my proper work, and there will be nothing left for the world to talk of. So you may spare yourself the trouble of my ruin. There will be no occasion for it." "How sensible," Everton murmured, and I could have struck him for the satisfaction under it. He stayed a week. It was the longest week of 6 years, and I use no exaggeration. He was never anything but courteous, and he was, the whole week, at his patient, elegant work. A word to me in the library about my obligations to the name. A word to the servants that got back to me about how sad it would be if the family were to be embarrassed. And I later learned, more than one word written down to the village, where a Marchmont's coin and a Marchmont's smile could purchase all the raised eyebrows and lowered voices that a scandal wants for kindling. By the week's end, When I rode down to Thornby on estate business, I felt the change in the very air of the market square, the way conversation stilled and started again as I passed, the way a shopkeeper's wife looked at me and then, pointedly, passed me. Word was abroad. The cursed Duke had taken up with his nurse, and the county, which had feared me too much to pity me for 6 years, had found at last a way to feel superior to me, and was enjoying it enormously. Adeline felt it before I told her. Of course she did. She had lived her whole life at the level of the world where such things are felt first and hardest. She said nothing to me of it. But I saw her grow quiet, and I saw her, more than once, standing at a window looking down the moss-green road toward the village with an expression I could not read, and I knew, with a dread I could not name, that she was making a decision, and that it was not the decision I wanted. She left on a gray morning without warning, while I was out. She did it kindly. That was the worst of it. She waited until Bartleby was on his feet and Suki's chest was sound, and there was, as she had promised there would be, no more reason under heaven for her to stay. She settled her few things. She took her leave of the servants, who wept, even the men, and she left me a letter in a plain, firm hand, propped on the desk in the library where I would be sure to find it. I found it at dusk, coming in cold and empty-handed from a ride I had taken to escape the wrongness of the house, not yet knowing why it was wrong. And I stood by the window in the failing light and read it, and I have it still, and I could set down every word. She wrote that she was going, that the sick were mended and her work was done and it was time. She wrote that I had woken these weeks from a long grief, and that she was glad of it beyond anything she could say, and that I must not on any account go back to sleep, that I must keep the mirrors turned to the light and let the noise into the house, and cut the rose back hard in the autumn and feed its root, and let the spring astonish me. She wrote that a man like me was made to be loved, and would be, wholly and rightly, by someone the world would let him love, and that I must let that happen and not grudge it. And then, at the last, she wrote, and here the firm hand faltered, just once, a single blot where the pen had pressed too hard, that she was leaving before the thing between us could become a thing the world would break us both upon, that she had watched the world break such things all her life and would not stand and watch it break this one, that she would carry the weeks at Harrowden as the brightest of her life, and would ask nothing more of them, and begged me not to come after her, because if I came after her, she did not think she would have the strength to send me away twice. Do not come after me. I read that line, and I put the letter down, and I stood at the window in the dark, and I felt the old silence come back into the house, the great grief quiet of 6 years, spreading out now to fill the room she had filled with noise, and I understood that I stood, at that moment, at a fork that ran the length of the rest of my life. I could let the silence back. I could be the cursed Duke of Harrowden again, and turn the mirrors to the wall, and let the rose die under the bindweed, and prove Everton right, and prove the county right, and prove right the whole vast machinery of the world that had decreed that a man of my rank might not love a healer of no name. It would be easy. It would be, in a terrible way, restful. I knew exactly how to do it. I had 6 years of practice. Or I could do the one thing she had begged me not to do. I went after her. I did not take the carriage. There was no time, and besides, a carriage on that moss-green road would have crawled. I had Coombs saddled the fastest horse in a stable that had lately, under Adeline's influence, begun to hold horses worth the name again, and I rode down off the moor into the last of the light with her letter inside my coat and the wind at my back, and I did not know what I would say when I found her, only that I would not spend the rest of my life on that moor, knowing I had let her walk away to spare me a thing I did not want sparing from. I found her before the village. She had not gone by the coach. She was walking, her basket on her arm, her gray cloak dark at the shoulders where the evening damp had settled, a small solitary figure on the long gray road in the failing light. And when she heard the horse she did not turn, and I knew that she knew, and that she had told herself she would not turn. I came up on her and swung down before the horse had fully stopped, and I planted myself in the road in front of her so that she must either stop or walk into me. And she stopped and looked at me, and her face was wet, though whether with the damp or with weeping I could not at first tell. "I asked you not to," she said. Her voice broke on it. "I asked you the one thing." "You did," I said, "and I have spent 6 years doing exactly what the world asked of me, grieving quietly, wanting nothing, troubling no one, being cursed so that everyone might be comfortable. I did everything that was asked. It nearly killed me, Adeline. I will not do the asked thing again. Not this time. Not this." "You are a duke," she said, and it was almost a wail now, all the steadiness gone. "Do you not understand what they will do? Not to you, to me. I have seen it. A woman like me who reaches above herself, they do not forgive it, ever. They will make my name a filthy word in every drawing room in the county. Your cousin has already begun it. Your Cordelia's family will finish it. You will bring a nameless apothecary's daughter into the house of Harrowden, and the whole world will turn its back. And I will not, I cannot, be the ruin of the man who—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. The tears came freely now, and she did not wipe them. "The man who what?" I said low. "Say it. You would not answer me in the garden. Answer me now in the road, with nothing at all to gain by it, since you mean to walk away. The man who what, Adeline?" "The man I love," she said, and her voice cracked in two on the word, "and cannot have." I took her face in both my hands there in the middle of the road, and I did not kiss her. I want it set down that I did not then, in the road, with her weeping. A man does not seize what he has just been told he cannot have. I only held her face and made her look at me, and I said, "Then let me tell you what the world will do, since you have told me. The world will talk. It will talk for a season, and then for less, and then it will find some fresher scandal, because the world's appetite for other people's happiness is bottomless, but its memory is short. My cousin will be disappointed of his inheritance, which he has not earned and does not deserve, and he will sulk in London on his debts, and I will not lose a night's sleep over it. Cordelia's family," and here my voice roughened, because this was the hard thing, "Cordelia's family loved her, and they grieve her still, as I do, and they may take it hard, and if they do I am sorry for it, but Cordelia is 6 years gone, Adeline, and she was the kindest soul I ever knew until you. And I do not believe, I will not believe, that she would have me spend the rest of my one life a ghost on this moor to spare her family a season's talk. I think she would have liked you. I think she would have been glad someone had the sense to turn my mirrors to the light." "You cannot know that," Adeline whispered. "No," I said, "but I know this. I know that I have been dead 6 years and you woke me. I know that you turned my house from a tomb into a home and never once asked to be paid a penny of besides for it. I know that you would walk into the dark alone to spare me a scandal I am begging you to let me share. And I know that a man does not meet such a woman twice in one life, and that if I let you walk down this road tonight to be forgiven by a world I do not respect, I will have earned every day of the loneliness that follows, and I will deserve to be called cursed because I will have cursed myself." I drew a breath. "The world will not forgive us, Adeline. Very well. I have made my peace with not being forgiven. What I cannot make my peace with is not being with you. So." And I let go of her face and I stepped back there in the road, and I did the one thing I had not done in 6 years, the thing that frightened me more than the fever or the grief or the whole mass disapproval of the county. I made myself entirely vulnerable to another human soul on purpose in the open. I am asking you, not the going rate, not for a fortnight, for the whole of it. Come back to Harrowden and marry me and let the world say what it likes. Be a duchess it will not forgive, at the side of a duke it never forgave anyhow. We are neither of us made for its forgiveness. Let us do without it, together." She stood in the road and looked at me, and the light was nearly gone, and I could see her fighting it, the lifetime of hard sense, the instinct to protect me by leaving, warring with the plain human wish, at last spoken, to stay. And I did the hardest thing of all, which was to say nothing more, and not to touch her, and to let her choose freely, because a love got by wearing down a good woman's proper fears is not worth the getting. "They will be so cruel to you," she said at last, very low. "You do not know how cruel because of me." "They have been cruel to me for 6 years for nothing," I said. "Let them be cruel to me now for something, for the best thing. I can bear anything, Adeline, for a reason. You taught me that of Bartleby the first night. A man can bear the fever if he has a reason to live. Be my reason. I am asking you to be my reason." And she made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the sound of a dam that has held too long finally giving way, and she dropped the basket in the road. I remember the small clatter of it, the bundled herbs spilling on the wet stones, and she came to me, or I to her, I have never been able to say which. And I held her at last in the middle of the gray road in the last of the light, with the moor rising black on either side, and the village lamps just kindling below. And she wept into my coat, and I held on, and neither of us said anything for a long time, because everything that mattered had been said. "Yes," she said at last, into my chest, so quiet I felt it more than heard it. "God help us both, yes. We did not have an easy time of it. I will not pretend we did. Adeline had been right about the world, as she was right about most things. She had lived at the sharp end of it too long to be wrong. When it came out that the Duke of Harrowden meant to marry his nurse, the county did precisely what she had foretold. The invitations, such as they were, stopped. The calls, such as they had been, ceased. There was a period when I could not ride into Thornby without conversation stilling around me, and Adeline, God forgive them, was cut dead in the street by women not fit to carry her basket. Everton wrote me a long, wounded, elegant letter full of the family's honor and my father's memory, and the dreadful mistake I was making. And when that failed, he came in person and made a scene in my library that ended with my telling him, quite calmly, that he was no longer welcome at Harrowden, and that he might apply his energies to living within his means, since he would not be inheriting a penny of mine. Cordelia's mother wrote me a letter that I answered as gently as I knew how, and that I will not set down, because some griefs are not mine alone to make public. I will say only that in time, not soon, but in time, she came to Harrowden of her own accord, and sat with Adeline an hour in the morning room, and left having said something to her that made Adeline weep, in a good way, and after that there was peace on that front, which was the peace I had wanted most and expected least. We married quietly in the little church in Harrowden village where Adeline had worshipped all her life, with Bartleby standing up for me, leaning on a stick but upright, and Sukey scattering the last of the autumn's flowers, and Mrs. Pett weeping into her apron in the front pew, and Coombs scrubbed pink and miserable in a borrowed coat. There was no grand society there. There was no society at all, in the world's sense. There was only the household that Adeline had brought back from the grave, and the villagers among whom she had spent her life doing good, who filled that small church to the rafters because the woman they loved was marrying, and they did not care a straw whether the county approved. I stood at that altar and looked out at a church full of people the world would have called nobodies, an old steward, 2 housemaids, a cook, a groom, a village full of the poor she had tended, and I thought that I had never in my life been at a wedding so full of genuine gladness, and that the great and the good, sneering in their drawing rooms, had no notion what they were missing, and I pitied them. And afterward we went home to Harrowden, and I did the thing I had not been able to do alone. I took her that first evening as my wife into the long gallery, where the mirrors were all turned now to the light. I had done the rest of them, one by one, through the weeks of our engagement, as a man exercises a healing limb, all of them turned, save one thing. Cordelia's portrait still hung shrouded in its holland cloth. I had not been able to face it. And Adeline had never once pressed me to, in all that time. She had understood, as she understood everything, that it must be mine to do or not do in my own time. "Will you?" I said, and could not finish it. "I am here," she said, which was answer enough, and she took my hand. And with her hand in mine I lifted the cloth from my first wife's portrait, and I looked at Cordelia's painted face for the first time in 6 years, young and kind, and forever the age she had been when I lost her, and it did not destroy me, as I had feared for 6 years that it would. It grieved me deeply and cleanly the way a well-tended grief grieves, that has been given a proper place instead of the whole house. And it did something else that I had not expected. It steadied me. Because I stood there with my hand in the hand of the woman who had woken me, and I looked at the face of the woman I had lost, and I understood all at once that loving Adeline did not unlove Cordelia, that the heart is not a room with space for only one, that grief and joy could hang side by side in the same gallery, both in the light, and neither the poorer for the other. Adeline looked a long moment at the portrait. Then she said softly, "She was lovely. I am glad to see her at last. I have felt her in this house since the night I came, a good presence, a gentle one. I do not think she would have wanted the mirrors turned to the wall." "No," I said, "I have come to think not." "Then we will keep her here in the light," Adeline said, "where she belongs, and you will tell me about her when you wish to and not when you don't. And she will be part of the house as she should be, and not a ghost shut in the dark. That is how the dead like best to be kept, I think. Remembered in a house that is living, not a house that has died with them." She pressed my hand. "You are not cursed, Gabriel. You never were. You were only a man who loved so well that losing it nearly finished him. There is no curse in that. There is only a very great capacity for love, which is a thing to be glad of, once it has somewhere to go again." I could not speak. I only lifted her hand and pressed my lips to it, there in the gallery, before Cordelia's portrait, and all the mirrors turned to the light. The spring, as she had promised it would, astonished us. The rose we had cut back hard in the autumn, and fed at the root, came up that April in a great extravagant riot of bloom, the whole freed cane heavy with it. More roses than that half-wild bush had any business bearing, as though it meant to make up all at once for 6 years of strangling in the dark. Adeline and I stood before it one morning in the Mendied garden, the beds dug over now, the physic beds replanted, Coombs brambles beaten back, and everywhere the small green insurgency of things given, at last, a little room and a reason to go on, and she slipped her hand into mine, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that wanted saying. I opened the music room that summer. I had a man come from York to tune the pianoforte that had stood silent 6 years, and Adeline, who could not play a note, and did not pretend to, sat and listened while I, who had not touched the keys since Cordelia died, picked out haltingly and then less haltingly the things my hands remembered, and the music went out through the opened windows over the Mendied garden and up into the moor, and I saw Mrs. Pett stop in the kitchen doorway to listen, and old Bartleby, who by every reckoning ought to have died that autumn of the fever, and had instead, out of pure stubbornness, and to spite the physician who would not come, lived to see his master married and mended. Old Bartleby stood in the far doorway with tears running down into his whiskers, and did not trouble to hide them. The county forgave us in the end, or grew bored of not forgiving us, which comes to the same thing and is all one can reasonably ask of the county. When Adeline, that first year, nursed half of Thornby through a putrid throat that the fine physician was too grand and too frightened to treat properly, and lost not one of them, the town discovered that a duchess who had been an apothecary's daughter was a remarkably convenient thing to have on the moor, and the cut direct became the grudging nod became, in time, the genuine welcome, for people will forgive a great deal in one who has sat up all night with their sick children. The drawing-rooms came round more slowly, out of self-interest and curiosity and the plain wearing down of time, and I found I did not much care whether they came round at all. We had the house full of noise. We had the mirrors in the light. We had a christening before 2 years were out, and then another in the little village church, with the same congregation of nobodies who had filled it at our wedding, and I stood at that font and thought of the child Cordelia and I had lost, and grieved it cleanly in its proper place in the gallery of my heart, and rejoiced in the child in Adeline's arms, and found there was room in me for both, as there had always been, had I only known. They had called me the cursed Duke of Harrowden, and for 6 years I had let them, because it was easier than being seen. And then a woman with mud on her hem had knocked 3 plain strokes on my door in a storm, and walked past me into the dark house without one particle of fear, and had turned my mirrors to the light, and cut back my rose, and told me the truth to my face for a month together, and taught me that a man can bear anything if he has a reason to live, and then had tried to walk away down a gray road to spare me the world's unforgiving. And I had gone after her, the one thing she begged me not to do. And it had been the saving of my life. The world would not forgive us. It is true, it never entirely did. But I learned from the plainest and best woman I ever knew that there are things far better worth the having than the world's forgiveness, that a house full of noise is better than a quiet one, and a rose cut back and fed is better than a rose let die, and a mirror in the light is better than a mirror to the wall, and a love the world will not forgive, held on to anyway, in the open, without shame, is better by far than a safe and lonely peace. She is in the garden as I write this, on her knees in the good earth with her sleeves pushed back, talking to the roses, a smudge of soil on her cheek and no notion in the world how dearly I love her. In a moment I will put down my pen and go out to her, and she will look up and push the hair off her forehead with the back of one dirty wrist, and leave a fresh streak of soil, and tell me some good news about a plant. And I will stand and watch her a moment first, the way a man stands at the edge of a lit window, come in from a long cold, except that I am not outside the window any longer. I have not been outside it in years. She opened the door and let me in, that night in the storm, and I have been warm ever since. Let the world keep its forgiveness. I would not trade 1 hour in that garden for the whole of it.